Hello everyone! We got a little bit of a treat over the holidays. I'm not sure if you missed it, but the creators of Love, Death, and Robots made a new short anthology called Secret Level, where they did a bunch of shorts about video game worlds and game worlds. And it was pretty good. I mean, a solid B- all the way through. But more importantly, they did do one about Dungeons & Dragons. And I thought this would be a fun opportunity to go through this little short video about Dungeons & Dragons and highlight some of the lore bits, some of the spells, locations, creatures, and just general themes and how they relate to Dungeons & Dragons that you might play at your table. Kind of like a breakdown. Why should all those Star Wars and Marvel guys have all the fun? We don't get a lot of media for Dungeons & Dragons, so why not pick apart this one? So this is my breakdown of all the lore and things you might have missed in the Dungeons & Dragons Secret Level short. So this beautifully animated short opens on a scene of 4 individuals descending on a small camp. And early on, there's already an indication here that we're dealing with somebody who has some power of necromancy, because if you take a close look at the cart next to the camp, those horses are skeletons. Those are skeletal horses, so either that cart has been there for a very long time, or we're dealing with a necromancer. After that, we take a look inside the cart, and we meet one of our main characters, a character by the name of Solen, played by Noah Manzoor. I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. So Noah is covered in tattoos and he's trapped in this what looks like a cage, and he's being transported by skeletal horses and presumably whoever is here at this camp. And he's hearing very scary voices that kind of speak to him in shouts and hisses. From there, the figures that we saw at the beginning of the scene descend into the camp, peeking into the cage and deciding that they are going to rescue Solen. They unleash hell on the people in the camp. But before they do so, the leader of the group, Mora, says something very interesting that tells us almost exactly where we are in the Forgotten Realms. She stands before the denizens of the camp and says that these are hallowed lands of the Loyal Fury. For those of you who don't know, the Loyal Fury is in fact the god of paladins, the god of protection, Torm. And while Torm is widely worshipped throughout the Sword Coast, he is very well established in the area known as Eltegard and the city of Elturel. This is kind of a center of worship for Torm worshippers, and a place where you find a lot of Torm paladins. So in all likelihood, we're probably in the Eltegard or the Eltegard area, somewhere in the southern Sword Coast. From there, a fight breaks out at the camp, and we see one of the attackers morph into a giant boar and send one of the camp's denizens flying. And eventually, Solen's cage is shattered, and he falls unconscious beneath the screams of the voice inside his head. He is picked up and carried off to the camp by his 4 would-be rescuers. However, as Solen is rescued, a winged creature observes from up above. It's connected to a scrying orb wielded by some kind of elven or half-elven lich, I'm not entirely sure, and he is watching everything unfold, the keen interest in this young human boy with all these weird tattoos. From there, we cut to the adventurers' camp, and we finally meet our full party. We have Mora, the Goliath Paladin. If I had to guess her subclass, because in all honesty, we don't get to see her do a lot of paladin spells or moves in this short, I would say she's probably Oath of Devotion or Oath of Redemption. Mostly because those are the 2 oaths that mostly match her flavor based on her actions at the short. Next up, we meet Short Queen Tally, the gnome wizard, played by Laura Woolland. And we have our serene beast, the dwarf Luzum. He is a dwarf monk. We'll talk about his subclass a little later, but he is played by Delroy Atkinson. And finally, we have the criminally underutilized, either orc or half-orc, feels more full orc to me, but orc druid by the name of Hokal. I hope I'm saying that right. We don't get to hear her name a lot in the short, or her speak much at all, but when she does speak, she is voiced by Umalisa Kahinga, and I hope I'm saying that correctly as well. So Solen awakens all startled at the camp as everyone starts to kind of hop on him. Everybody kind of piles on. Mora's trying to calm him down, but Tally is very upset and wants to know if he is dangerous to the rest of the group. This feels like such a great table D&D moment, because you have this new kind of NPC character being brought into the party, and there's always that moment where there's the suspicious people in the party trying to figure out if they're a threat, and the other people trying to be good and help somebody out. I've seen this 1,000 times at 100 different tables. What's also really interesting about this is Tally doesn't trust Solen initially. Tally's group is comprised mostly of wisdom and charisma casters. So everyone else in the group would have better insight or be pushed in another direction by their oath to want to trust Solen. Tally, as an intelligence caster, being a wizard, probably doesn't have an incredible insight check. So, in all likelihood, everyone else in the group either passed their insight check or was forced to trust Solen because of their oath, and Tally didn't pass their insight check because they're an intelligence caster. Probably a bit of table talk there, but I just thought it was interesting that the intelligence caster ends up being the person that doesn't trust Solen. Makes sense to me. So a couple interesting things happen during this interaction here. Number one, the party explains to Solen that they rescued him from a group of Cult of the Dragon cultists. So we know who our bad guys are. We're looking at the Cult of the Dragon here. Tally remarks that the tattoos all over Solen makes him look like somebody ripped him out of the Book of Vile Darkness. For those of you who don't know, the Book of Vile Darkness is basically the ultimate super evil book, Necronomicon, Book of the Dead, Book of the Damned, whatever your flavor you prefer. But it's the book of ultimate evil in the Dungeons & Dragons lore and mythology. Legend has it that the book was written by the undead prima donna Vecna himself, and Vecna keeps the book within the rib cage of his lich form. From there, we have Luzum, the dwarf monk, intoning that the tattoos mark Solen as a sacrifice, and in all likelihood, the Cult of the Dragon was probably taking him to the Well of Dragons to be a sacrifice for Tiamat. Further cementing the idea that we are in the kind of Eltegard region of the Sword Coast. In fact, the Well of Dragons is just a little bit to the northeast of the Eltegard region. So while the party's collectively berating and trying to calm down Solen, he has the voice in his head screaming at him, and eventually he lashes out, grabbing a dagger from Mora's belt and jabbing it into her side. The rest of the party is shocked and springs into action. Luzum puts Solen into a hold, and Tally is ready to light the kid on fire before Mora throws a cooking pot over her little hand to put out the flames. And then Mora, illustrating how it's hard to keep a good paladin down, does a little lay on hands to quickly clear up her own wound, and takes Solen away to have a little conversation with him, telling the rest of the party that it's going to be okay. Solen seems remorseful for the stab, like he didn't want to do it, and that something had taken over him in that moment. So Mora takes Solen out of the camp to go have a chat with him, and at this moment we see her pass through a kind of barrier that has been put up over the camp. This in all likelihood is some kind of tiny hut spell, or some other similar camp protection spell that is out there, and we can also see that a Hokal, being the druid of the group, very much at home outdoors, is out on ridges and rocks overlooking the camp. And Hokal watches Mora as she takes Solen out to an area underneath the ruins of some massive statue to talk to him about her backstory and find out a little bit more about him. Now, I don't know who this statue is. I had some theories. Initially, I thought maybe we were near Boriskir Bridge. Boriskir Bridge, for those of you who don't know, is this enormous bridge in the southern Sword Coast that has a massive statue of Cyric and a massive statue of Baal on the other end of it, and they're staring at each other, and I believe they were torn down at various points, but I'm not entirely sure. I don't think this statue is actually anybody though. I think it's just a old wizard statue from old ruins. So Mora and Solen have a nice heart-to-heart talk. Solen tells Mora that it's better for everyone if they just leave him behind, but Mora's a paladin, so she can't do that. Mora also takes this time to reveal to Solen that she had a violent, troubled past where she hurt a lot of people before she found her way to becoming a paladin of Torm. She takes her holy symbol of Torm and hands it off to Solen, and the group is interrupted by the group of the dragon cult coming into their camp, presumably to take Solen away. From there, we cut to a beautiful battle set piece where we see this enormous statue of someone kneeling with a sword, and the sword forms a bridge over this waterfall leading to this mountain lair. lair. Presumably this mountain lair is where we find Oriel, the person who is supposed to help Solen with his curse. And from here on out, we're heading into spoiler territory, so if you don't want the short spoiled for you, pause the video now and go watch the damn thing. It's short enough. You can get through most of it in the time it takes you to make a burrito. Alright, warning given. Moving along. So the party rides up to this location, and a fun bit of lore detail on the mounts here is the horse is clearly a summoned steed, summoned by Mora, and as she carries Solen up to the castle. And the second mount is actually a Hokul in her giant boar form, carrying both Tally and Lazum. Now, as they get up to the front doorway, Tally gets right to work, incanting a spell to open up the door. Obviously, these doors are sealed by some kind of magical enchantment. However, the dragon cult is hot on their heels and they begin to cross the bridge. And from here, we get a really good view of these elaborate doors that Tally is opening, and we can see that the doors actually have a design of a dragon, kind of crouched with his palms raised to the air as he overlooks what appears to be a small kingdom or keep. Hokul then springs into action, delaying the dragon cult by casting what appears to be a wall of air spell. Very artfully, beautifully cast, swinging of the staff, love the whole thing. However, the leader of the group, the Lich that we saw earlier, is riding this enormous flying beast. This actually appears to be a wyvern. We get a better look at it later. It has strange runes on its shoulders, and you also see its barbed tail lingering in the background of it. This is a bit of an unusual take on the wyvern, if I'm being honest. It's a little bit more like the wyverns we see in World of Warcraft, a bit more bat-like or mammalian-like in appearance, whereas in most 5th edition and more recent editions of Dungeons & Dragons, wyverns have been mostly depicted as reptilian or even cobra-like, or for those who pronounce it wyvern, it could be a wyvern as well. I don't know which is the right pronunciation. But the Lich, riding his wyvern, whatever you want to call it, flies over the wall of air and targets Tally with what appears to be an ice storm spell. This appears to be a modified version that uses sharp shards instead of blunt damage, cast in a line, but whatever, he's a Lich, maybe he's playing with magic. Solen, noticing that Tally is in danger, and because he's a good little boy, dives on Tally to protect her from the ice shards, taking a few ice shards in the back and immediately gaining Tally's trust. Tally yells to Mora to get Solen inside and says that she and the rest of the group will hold off the dragon cult while they meet with Oriel. From here, we cut to inside and we see that Oriel is in fact a gold dragon, a very large and powerful gold dragon. Surprise! This kind of makes sense because Torm has always had a bit of an association with gold dragons. In fact, some depictions of Torm has him riding a gold dragon into battle. On top of that, Torm is also closely associated with Bahamut, the good dragon god of gold dragons, so the two are very closely tied. Oriel says that he can help Solen out. Solen says that Oriel should get away because whatever's inside of him doesn't like the gold dragon. Oriel, in typical arrogant dragon fashion, says yes, the wicked do tend to fear me, and says that he will absorb Solen's curse and destroy it because he is a good boy and doesn't want to hurt anyone. Back outside, we can see the dragon cultists have succeeded their strength saves and are starting to push their way through the wall of air. Interesting bit of detail here. If you look closely, you can see that all of the dragon cultists are wearing helmets that mimic the appearance of chromatic dragons. We can see the one that fires an arrow is wearing a helmet depicting a blue dragon's face. We can also see one forcing his way through the wall of air has a helmet that looks like a black dragon's face, and you catch glimpses of a few others as the battle continues. It's a nice bit of extra detail that adds some variety to this invading force, and it's also consistent with the lore because the dragon cultists do tend to style their helmets and masks based on whatever dragons they happen to be serving or whatever dragon that they particularly find affinity with. So as the dragon cultists begin to force their way through the wall of air, they believe that they're free to start firing arrows at the group. However, they never learned the first rule of combat: you do not shoot arrows at a monk. And of course, Lazum instantly catches one of the arrows and throws it back at the dragon cultists. Hokul, in brilliant use of cantrips, I hope you're paying attention, kids, starts using her gust spell to fling dragon cultists off this precarious bridge. Then the team shouts that they are getting outnumbered and ask Tally to conjure up a fire spell. Tally goes to conjure up a big fire spell, but the dragon cultist leader, this Lich, who I will note seems to be wearing the wearer of purple robes given to leaders of the cult of the dragon. Leaders of the cult of the dragon are known as wearers of purple. They all wear purple robes, but his have been darkened and faded, possibly this lich has been in the dragon cult for a very long time. And I suppose this is as good a time as ever to drop a little bit of lore about the dragon cult that is fascinating about this particular adventure. So the cult of the dragon, or the dragon cult, is a cult that believes dragons are destined to rule over the world of Toril. How they've gone about this in the past is they used to be very necromancy-centric. They would convince dragons to become Dracoliches because they believed that eventually the world would be inherited by immortal Dracoliches, and so convincing more dragons to become Dracoliches would help them along in this process. However, this must be in a bit of a transition period, because most recently, around the time 5th edition came out, the dragon cult started to shift gears and started to become about resurrecting Tiamat and bringing her to the prime material plane. Tiamat is the evil goddess of chromatic dragons. She has 5 dragon heads representing the 5 chromatic dragon types, and she currently resides in the first layer of hell, first layer of the 9 hells, known as Avernus, where she lives alongside Zariel, where she used to rule, but Zariel took her place, and now she just hangs out like the worst roommate ever. So presumably this lich has been in the dragon cult for a very long time, being obviously some kind of elf or half-elf. It's obviously a very long lived, and this was before they became an immortal lich. So it's possible that they joined around the really into making Dracoliches phase of the dragon cult and just really got on board with the whole Tiamat thing, as we'll see very soon. I also want to highlight the lich's robes look more purple in some of the shots, but in some of his last shots they look a bit more dark blue. I think this might have been to try and contrast him with Tally's robes. Now, as far as who this lich actually is, it's hard to say. There's been numerous liches in the dragon cult. This is just probably somebody that we've never met before, just a nameless elf lich who works in the dragon cult and happens to be a wearer of purple. Anyway, so the lich targeting Tally jumps down in front of her and casts what appears to be a Frost Nova spell, like in World of Warcraft. This is my best guess, of course. It just doesn't seem to line up with any other spells. You could say perhaps he launched a Cone of Cold when he hit the ground, as Tally has a bit of frost on her later. I don't know, it's hard to say. I think a few WoW players worked on this game and kind of mixed stuff up a little bit. Either way, this interrupts another one of Tally's fire spells, and she is left to face off the lich alone while the rest of her party deals with the oncoming Cult of the Dragon members. And deal with the Cult of the Dragon members they do. Ahokal seems to be saving her more powerful spells for a possible boss fight later. Good instincts, Ahokal, MVP, as she tends to favor a Shillelagh move and her cantrip Gust of Wind to launch these cultists off the bridge. This leads me to believe that Ahokal is probably some kind of Circle of the Land druid. I'm not sure which kind, but she tends to favor her druidic spells over her animal shapes in combat. Then we move on to Absolute Unit Lazoom, who gets up close and personal with these dragon cultists and beats the shit out of them monk style. It's really cool and impressive to watch, and it's fun to see monk combat in any scenario, but particularly with this beefy dwarf just cracking the shit out of these dragon cultists. It's really fun to watch. We also see these occasional bursts of radiant light from Lazoom's strikes. This makes me think that Lazoom is probably a Sun Soul monk, causing these bursts of radiant light or fire damage whenever he strikes his opponents. The Lich continues to descend on Tally, using Counterspell to interrupt her attempts to launch a counterattack with a fire spell. Lazoom notices this and tries to rush to Tally's aid, however he is blocked by the massive wyvern mount of the Lich. Lazoom makes pretty short work of the wyvern with his incredible monk skills, Go Off Short King, and Tally is rescued by group MVP Ahokal, who jumps in and casts a polymorph on the Lich while he is distracted, turning him into a tiny snail. Tally, now completely unhindered, finally gets off the fire spell she's been trying to launch for the entire short and blasts across the bridge with raging flames. I'm not sure which spell this is. Part of me thinks this is Burning Hands, but like a boosted version, so maybe she upcast it. Or perhaps this is like a Wall of Flame or a Firestorm spell. It's unlikely to be a fireball because there's no kaboom. There's supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom! We cut back to inside, and Solen's curse is fully absorbed by Oriel, and his tattoos fade away, and he says his voices are finally quiet. Everything seems to be great as the rest of the party moves in to join them, and then suddenly it becomes very clear clear that Oriel is not okay. Oriel is coughing, he's shaking his head. He says that whatever was inside of Solen, it is very loud and very aggressive, and the voice inside of Oriel now says, "Fool, it was a gateway." As Oriel begins to freak out, he shouts that everyone should flee and run away as he slumps over on some ruins, and it looks like dear Oriel dies. And from his corpse erupts massive wings and claws, and from his body emerges Tiamat, the five-headed Dragon Queen. The evil goddess of chromatic dragons. Cool bit of detail here as Oriel's body is disintegrating and Tiamat is emerging. You keep hearing the sound of like clinking coins dropping down, like the golden scales of the dragon are falling like so many coins to the ground. Then the newly arisen Tiamat immediately launches a five-headed breath attack at the group, which is instantly blocked by Solen as he clutches his new holy symbol of Torm. We'll call this a divine shield spell, but we'll also call this what it is, Dungeon Master Intervention. Solen holds back the breath with his new holy power and implores the rest of the group to run away, saying that he can hold her back. He's been doing it by himself for years. And then Mora says, "I reckon you could, but you're not alone anymore." And the whole group makes some cool poses, power-ups, kicks in their buffs, and we end with the beginning of what is presumably a climactic battle against the dragon goddess Tiamat. And that's all the interesting tidbits and lore elements that I noticed in the Dungeons & Dragons short The Queen from the Secret Level Anthology. Is there anything that you noticed that I might have missed? What did you think of this short? Please let me know in the comments below. Thank you all for watching and subscribing. Until next time, everybody, puck out.